Welcome to worship at Old First Presbyterian Church on this 22nd day of August. First, I want to thank you so much if you were part of the team and part of the people and part of the choir that helped us do a streamlined service in church last Sunday. We streamlined it live streamed. I don't even know what to call it, but we did it. And I'm especially thankful for Kim and Chris, who did lots of work to make that happen. But we got still lots to learn, but at least we know it's a possibility. So when we open up, if you are unvaccinated or if you are just unable to come to church, you can still join us in some way. And we're hoping that opening up to do live worship or worship in the actual sanctuary will happen on the 12th of September, but we're still holding that with some looseness because this Delta variant, it's got us a bit worried, and we'll see how things will go. I will tell you that the food pantry will start on September 11th to start using churches again and on a weekly basis. So watch your emails, because in October, I'm going to be asking Old First to step up, and we are looking for new coordinators to help with that. Dana, our last coordinator, was so faithful for so many years, but he has moved to Washington. So would you pray for a leader to come forward? And if you might have a nudging on that, would you speak to me? Speaking of nudging, I want to nudge and invite you to give money to help the people in Haiti. You know, they've been wrecked by that awful earthquake. It's like the second earthquake and tragedy in 10 years. And the Presbyterian Church, through the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, is getting money and supplies there. And what I love about the PDA, they go and buy products and things that help locally or buy them close, so they help the economies in the areas that are close to the crisis. So you'll see some information on this page today. And you also can go to our Facebook page or our website, and I would invite you to give. And I'd also just remind you that we're in a series today called I've Been Meaning to Ask. It's a series on curiosity and courage and connection. The theme today is I've been meaning to ask, where does it hurt? And so you're going to be able to watch right now a video that kind of goes into that theme a bit.
Hi, I'm Brittany Fiskus van Rossum. I'm a pastor at Mercy Community Church, which is a grassroots ecumenical congregation that meets in borrowed spaces and on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. We bring people in and out of housing together to gather multiple days of the week to eat food together and worship God and fellowship and build community, work for justice, and just be the church together. Where does it hurt? This is a humanizing question. One, it acknowledges that all human beings experience pain. But I like this question because where does it hurt also acknowledges that the pain that you're feeling is legitimate. It says, where does it hurt? And even if your answer, even if your story, your experience, your pain is different from mine, I value you as a human being enough to ask you this question. And I value you enough to listen to and accept the response. It's when Eli finally stops and listens to Hannah, who shares her painful story in her own words. It's when Jesus is walking through the crowd, but takes the time to stop and turn and notice and acknowledge and listen to this long-hurting woman who others have labeled impure. This question is humanizing because it says that even if I don't have the answers, even if I don't have a solution, I value you enough as a human to listen to your experience. Have you ever not wanted to ask this question because you don't know if you can accept the answer? As a pastor to a community of many people who experience homelessness, there are some days that I struggle to find the right compassionate words. There are days when I don't necessarily want to ask the question, how was your night last night? Because I'm afraid of what the response might be. I'm afraid because maybe they'll say it was too cold or too rainy, or maybe the police told them to move, or maybe they experienced violence, and maybe I won't have a solution or an answer. Maybe I won't know what to do, or maybe even their answer is going to call to attention this injustice happening in my own city, and I'm going to have to acknowledge that I'm complicit in some of the things and some of the broken systems that cause other people pain. Even as I was asked to reflect on this question, I found myself wanting to jump to the next questions, like, where does it hurt? Okay, what can I do? How can I fix it? How can I be a helper? And, I think that's natural. But I think that as faithful people, as people called to be present to one another, as people who follow an embodied, enfleshed God who was present to human beings and right in the middle of humanity and all of its pain and all of its suffering, I think we too are called to not move too quickly to what's next. We're called to ask, where does it hurt? And to be present to whatever the answer might be. We're called to value the human being, the stories, the experiences, the pain of others, even if it's different from our own, even if it calls us to account. If we are to be people who bring peace and healing, it's going to happen through listening. It's going to happen through relationships. It's going to happen through being present to one another, bearing witness to pain, because that's who our God is. Our God bears witness to our pain. Our God stands alongside us in all of our pain and suffering, and we're called to do that for one another.
Let us join together for the call to worship. Here in this place, we wear our hearts on our sleeves. There is no use in filters or walls. This space is an authentic space. This space is a brave space. For when it comes to God, we are always invited to bring our full selves into the room. So come into this place with your hurt, with your joy, your prayers, and your dreams. All of God's children are welcomed here. Let us worship Holy God.
Here in this place the new light is streaming. Now is the darkness vanished away. See in this space face our fears and our dreamings, brought here to you in the light of this day. Gather us in the lost and forsaken, gather us in the blind and the lame. Call to us now and we shall awaken, we shall arise at the sound of your name. We are the young, our lives are a mystery. We are the old who yearn for your face. We have been sung throughout all of history, called to be light to the whole human race. Gather us in the rich and the haughty, gather us in the proud and the strong. Give us a heart so meek and so lowly, give us the courage to enter the song. Here we will take the wine and the water, here we will take the bread of new birth. Here you shall call your sons and your daughters, call us anew to be salt for the earth. Give us to drink the wine of compassion, give us to eat the bread that is you. Nourish us well and teach us to fashion lives that are holy and hearts that are true. Not in the dark of buildings confining, not in some heaven light years away. Here in this place the new light is shining. Now is the kingdom and now is the day. Gather us in and hold us forever. Gather us in and make us your own. Gather us in, all peoples together. Fire of love in our flesh and our bone.
Erwin and I ask you to join in this unique style of a confession today. May the words be yours. May the hope be yours. May the forgiveness be yours. Erwin, I've been meaning to ask.
How are you? What has your year been like? Did you know I've been thinking of you?
I have been meaning to ask.
Is your mom okay? Did your sister find a job? Did you ever think we would still be here?
I've been meaning to ask.
Did it get any easier? Did the grief subside? Were you ever able to sleep at night?
I've been meaning to ask, but I haven't.
Because it's hard. Because I want to know the right thing to say. Because I'm never sure what you need.
I've been meaning to ask. I'm so sorry for my silence.
Forgive me. Show me where it hurts.
Let's start again.
Family of faith, we could all use some practice asking where it hurts and listening deeply and trying not to fix the problems. Take a moment of silent prayer now and think of the people in your world, in your lives, who you may need to reach out to and ask. Give their names to God.
Friends, trusting that God hears all things, we say together, Amen.
Okay.
Peace be with you, and also with you. Jesus is staying with you. Bye. Kisses. Hugs. See you next time.
Rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him, and he shall give thee thy heart's desires. Oh, rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him, and he shall give thee thy heart's desires. And he shall give thee thy heart's desires. Commit thy way unto him, and trust in him. Commit thy way unto him, and trust in him, and fret not thyself because of evildoers. Oh, rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him, wait patiently for him. Oh, rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him, and he shall give thee thy heart's desires, and he shall give thee thy heart's desires, and he shall give thee thy heart's desires. Oh, rest in the Lord, oh, rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him.
Friends, I'm reading from the book of Samuel, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20 today. And it's a section of the Old Testament that was written probably in 11th century BCE, before the Common Era. And Samuel, 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel were probably one book. And when this was being written, there was a crisis in the land, and one of them was eternal. One of them, those crises, was the priests themselves had become corrupt. They were not following in the ways of God. They were trying to get as much money as they could. And the people also had been wavering in following God. They had fallen away. And there was another crisis that the Philistines, these very military, aggressive folk, were kind of threatening the land. And so the people were in upheaval. So we enter into this story. Now, I'm going to do a bit of disclaimer and said it's a hard one to read because there are all these big names and I'm just going to stumble over them, but that's how it goes. I'll do my very best and you will hear the story. And it's rather a fascinating one. There was a certain man of Ramathaim, a Zephite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraite. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophniah and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day where Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, that other wife, used to provoke her severely and irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as they went to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband, Elkanah, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not worth more than 10 sons to you? And after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if only you would look on the misery of your servant and forget and remember me and not forget your servant, but you will give to your servant a male child, and then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine or intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you make this drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. I love that line. She says, Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Then Eli answered, Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then the woman went to her quarters, and she ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, "I have asked him of the Lord." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I wonder if when I read this passage, you thought to yourself, "I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone read that out loud before, much less preach on it." Well, you're not the only one. We were getting ready to do this service, and we meet in a worship team. It's Austin and Erwin and Larry and I. Erwin kind of said, in not so many words, "Maggie, that's kind of a weird passage. I don't think I've ever really noticed it before, much less heard anyone preach on it." And I said, "Well, it's in our lectionary. It's in our kind of suggested readings at least one time in 3 years." And I had to admit that really I had never preached it before. And if I'm honest with myself, I never knew this passage was here until someone said, you have to listen to Jim Forbes' Hannah Rose sermon. It's a really great sermon. It's a great name, Hannah Rose, in the Bible. And I'm thinking, I've read the Bible at least a couple times. I've never heard anyone called Hannah Rose. And I had to go back in my Bible kind of dictionary and find what he was referring to. And then I had to watch the sermon. Jim Forbes was the former pastor of Riverside Presbyterian Church, and you can watch the sermon on YouTube. It's really worth doing. And it's become a pretty famous sermon. And Jim Forbes was saying that Hannah Rose was a really super name, and it came from the Bible. And he suggested if you're going to choose a name for your daughter, you should use this one. And he said, Hannah Rose, you know the passage. It's right there in verse 9. Then Hannah rose in her hour of distress and went into the temple and praised. That was it. Hannah rose. And he said there were at least 20 women he knew that bared that name, Hannah Rose, including his own granddaughter. And he talked about how Hannah rose up out of her distress and pain and presented herself in the temple. And he said, this is a story that should not be overlooked. And any story that includes a woman as the main kind of feature in the Bible is a rare thing. And it's especially really interesting. It's at the beginning of the book of Samuel, and this is a woman who is barren. I mean, she is taunted and bullied. I mean, she is in emotional distress. That is not business as usual to have that recorded. Hannah, as you heard me read, is the wife of Elkanah. I'm probably just going to call him Elk because it's easier. And Elk had 2 wives. Now that's kind of racy, but that was normal, or could be normal in the day that this story was told. I wonder if that's one of the other reasons it wasn't preached very much. But the story just does tell us that Elk, or Elkanah, was probably wealthy because you couldn't really afford to have 2 wives unless you had a fair amount of money. I mean, I'm going to call her Penny. Penny had children, a lot of them boys and girls, and Hannah did not, and that was a really major difference between them. It was also a difference that Elk, he really said, I love Hannah. I mean, he used that language, and that isn't used very much in the Bible, and I suspect that made Penny really uncomfortable. I mean, she bore all the children, and that barren woman, why do you love her and you don't love me? And he showed that kind of care publicly when they would offer a sacrifice to God. They would do it at a temple, and it was probably maybe a lamb or maybe beef, and he gave a portion to Penny, and he gave double that portion to Hannah. That's a way of showing his favor, his love for Hannah publicly. And I want to remind you that Penny carried this kind of hate and disdain for Hannah, who was barren, but she wasn't the only one. For in that day, not having a child, especially not having a male child, was a shame. It was a disgrace. They were really, I mean, it said something was wrong with you, that God did not favor you. You got no respect if you were barren. You were considered damaged goods. Never said it about the husband, of course. It kind of implied that that person was cursed. And it was not just about missing the sweetness of nurturing a child and raising a child. If you didn't have children, it merely meant you had no future, no security in your old age. And in that shame that Hannah carried, Penny, this sister wife, taunted her. It really kind of bullied her. She's described as a rival who provoked her severely, especially when they went to the temple each year. She just really kind of ganged up on her and made her feel even worse than she did already. It's like she took Hannah's shame and jabbed at it and made it worse. And it's amazing to me that we hear that Hannah does not react to her in kind. And I really do wonder if Penny made Hannah's life worse because of Elk's willingness to say publicly that he loved her. And for Hannah, it didn't matter if he said he loved her. She had this unsettled ache that lingers no matter what one does. It's unlike hurts that are at least manageable. This type of hurt affects one's entire life, leaving the heart wounded and the spirit broken. This type of wound kind of impinges not only on one's life circumstances, but in the very sense of self as well. One pastor put it this way: it's a Hannah kind of hurt, the kind of hurt that leads to addictions and emotional disorders, since people will do about anything to relieve this kind of agony as they search for escape, some way to numb the pain, to remove the anguish, to discover some momentary peace. But Hannah resorted to no such escape. Hannah weeps and cannot eat. And Elk, he just misses the point. He tries to cheer her, tries to comfort her. He says, "Why are you so miserable? You have me. And what more do you want?" He just doesn't really hear what's going on with her. His clumsy attempt to comfort her is really what it is. And it's really all about him. Aren't I enough? Betty Ochtermeyer, one of my seminary professors, put it this way. I'm going to read it because it's that good and I don't have a copy at my own house. She says, to be sure, he loves Hannah and he takes good care of her, but she has a desperate need beyond him, and he does not understand that need. I wonder what the equivalent is in our time. A woman's need for recognition as an accomplished and intelligent person in her own right, a wife's longing for the love of friends and children beyond the love that her husband can give her, a desire for a secure status in a circle beyond her marriage. Every person, male and female, needs to feel important, and Hannah, above all else, wants to know that she is important in the sight of her community and to God. And so that's Hannah. And Hannah, then after his words that just prove he doesn't quite get it, does this amazing thing. Hannah rose up and turned to God. She went to the temple to pray. She went to share her pain, her depression, her misery with the one who could bear that pain. She turned to God. She turned this deep distress to the one who could bear it, to the one who could take it, the one she thought could change her circumstances. And so she's praying silently. I suspect she's rocking like this, and her lips are moving, and she just lays it all before God. Her pain, her distress, her shame. And it feels like the priest, Eli, just kind of knocks her down again, kind of does a little bit of Penny's bullying to her and says, "You're drunk. You're making a fool of yourself. You're making a scene in my temple. You are too emotional. Get out of here." And Hannah rises up again. I think it's Jim Forbes says that she rises up in hope and says, "I am not a worthless woman." She rose up and she spoke her truth. This is where I am supposed to be, praying my anxiety, my distress to the one that can hear me. She honestly shares her hurt. And in that, she also says, I am worth something. Even society thinks I am nothing. And amazingly, Eli hears her. He got it wrong. Her pain is acknowledged. He hears it. He hears that he is wrong, and healing happens. Go in peace. May God grant your request. Jim Forbes say Hannah rose up in hope when she left that place. And we do know further on the story that God hears her. For Samuel is born and becomes the last great judge in Israel. But that's a whole nother sermon. It's worth reading through Samuel to read that. One Baptist pastor named Kathy Donnelly introduced me to a writer named Lima Gahobi. And she's Liberian, and she was involved as one of the key figures in the nonviolent movement of women who played a pivot of ending Liberia's 14-year-long civil war. That was a while ago. I know there's distress there now, but she was a key movement, a key leader in that movement. And it's interesting, she was the fourth of 5 daughters, and there was kind of that Old Testament sense that boys are better. And her name means, what about me? Or why can't I conceive a son? Her name suggests, and her memoir that you can read bears that out, that there was pain and hurt in her family, but she didn't let it define her. And when she was 17, the country went in war with itself, and she endured much suffering during that war. Terror of the enemy soldiers on the streets, bullets in her living room, fleeing with her children to a refugee camp. And she also managed in that time to get an education. And she became a social worker, and she specialized in trauma counseling. That's how she used her pain. And when she met with women, she would write on a chalkboard, "No sense." And the chalkboard, and then she would cross out the prefix none, and she told the women, everything we say here makes sense. Don't be afraid to talk. Say what truth is in you. And in her book called Mighty Be Our Power, she described traveling to a camp for internally displaced people. In an outdoor shelter, about 50 women gathered to share their experiences during the war. And this exercise was called Shedding the Weight, because it encouraged women to divest themselves of the emotional burdens that they were carrying. And listening to the women unburden themselves was always hard, but on this day, there were so many stories of violence that she just thought they couldn't take it anymore. And she said that we can just stop. It's okay. And then an old woman rose up with her walking stick and said, "Don't let us stop. The UN brings us shelter and food and clothes, but what you've brought to us is more valuable. You've come to hear our stories from our bellies, stories that no one else asks us about. Please don't stop. Don't ever stop." The old woman understood the power of being heard, of sharing your story, of having your pain acknowledged and validated. The power of hearing someone and the power of being heard, of having your pain heard. It's about the courage to ask, where does it hurt? And the willingness to hear the pain of others. That is so powerful. For we believe that everyone carries a hurt, and everyone has the capacity to acknowledge the pain of others. Sometimes we're the sharer of the pain, and sometimes we're the ones that hear, and bear it. It's hard for us in some ways to hear deeply and either not hear it because it's sometimes we just can't take it in because it's too much, or we try to fix it or say, "Oh, how can I be helpful?" or "What can I do?" And sometimes when you say that, it makes the person feel like you can't hear me anymore. And sometimes people just need to get it out. And that starts the process to wholeness. I mean, there's something about being able to say what's been difficult, big or small, and that's a release in itself. I think Hannah, she discovered that when she laid out her heart to God. But I will admit, sometimes it's hard to hear the hurt when we're brave enough to ask to hear it without trying to fix it. I gotta tell you, I do this all the time. I want to make the pain go away. Sometimes I'm trying to make it go away for the person, but also because it's difficult for me. I've learned during these pandemic months that sometimes when I hear someone's pain, I just say, "Sounds like you're really miserable." I don't say much more than that. Because there is something in something in the value of just listening deeply. That people can know that they're not alone, that they're valued enough to be heard. And I've learned to try to stop myself by giving, but I'll say, "Would you like me just to listen, or do you want some advice?" And honestly, people say no. I often say, "I don't want any advice. I just want someone to hear my story." Then often they just want a prayer with that. "God, please care for this person. Be with them." Not a complicated thing. There's something about when we deeply listen to each other, when we are present for each other, that we learn compassion, co-passion. We learn the other stories, and it moves the focus off of us, and we remember that our experience is not the only experience, and we can care beyond our own needs and agendas. And I think that can bring us to heal this nation and issues of racism and issues of injustice, that we listen deeply, that we come in relationship before we try to fix something. And when we listen deeply, we act for the greatest good. We act for the world. We value others, and we can move forward in hope, and we can rise up in hope just like Christ did. It's a mysterious thing of listening and caring and speaking in truth, and then eventually using that knowledge and moving to try to reduce the hurt if possible, or to remind the people, we'll live through this and it will not last forever. We won't leave you. So I'm going to leave you with a poem by Sarah R. She's one of the folks who writes the liturgy in this series. I'll put it on the website, so not the website, but Facebook. You can come and look at it later. Here now, an ending, a poem, maybe a beginning. I can tell that you're hurting. It's the way your eyes cast down, the way you shuffle through the house, distractedly bumping into things. It's the restless sleep and the quiet space between us which turns us into icebergs. We float by, silent in the night, most everything existing under the surface. I can tell that you're hurting. In a way, your prayers were quick at first and then none at all. Your silence challenging God, daring God to say something to the world, say something to the void. I can tell you're hurting, but I don't know what it feels like. Tell me, where does it hurt? I'm not offering to fix the pain. I'm not that powerful. However, I'm offering to see it. Show me your scars, and I'll show you that you are not alone. May it be so. Amen. Let us join together in an affirmation of faith. On my best days, I believe that God is there, standing in the sun with me, laughing a contagious laugh and cheering me on. On my hardest days, I believe that God is there, standing in the rain with me, holding me up and sharing in my grief. No matter where I go, in joy or in loss, in pain or in love, in heartache or in gratitude, I believe that God is there, leaning in, noticing where it hurts and carrying me through it. And so I believe that we are called to care for each other as God cares for us. On your best days in the sun, on your worst days in the rain, I will do my best to be there for you. Amen.
Let us pray. Faithful, loving God, with joy we thank you for your constant presence in our lives, for the wonders of your creation and our natural world, and the diversity of humankind. Thank you that you hear our prayers this day and every day. We have much to be thankful for, and we know that you are part of all of that. And yet, while we acknowledge the blessings in our lives, we also carry pain. There's hurt all around us and around the world. Hurt from war and violence, hurt from greed and exploitation, hurt from poverty and hunger, hurt from abuse and addiction, hurt from disaster and disease. Sometimes the hurt is inside us. Sometimes we hurt others with our words and our actions. So today we lift up to you all the hurt and pain we carry. Break through our apathy and the walls we erect that keep us from seeing and feeling the hurt in others and in ourselves. Increase our empathy for others. Deepen our capacity to take on others' pain as you took on our pain on the cross. Free us from the fears and bias that keep us from loving others as you love. Be among us, hold our hurt, heal our wounds, so that we can act on our faith not with anemic charity, but with courage and compassion. Stir and compel us to promote healing and justice. Lead us to authentic relationships and partnerships with others, even if it is uncomfortable. Help us to be faithful and steadfast and not quit on ourselves or others when we fail or feel disappointed or rebuked in our efforts. Redirect us when we are misguided or blinded by our own pride and hubris. We lift up in prayer those who lead us in our nation, our state, our city, and our church. Grant them the wisdom and insights to make decisions and take actions which will bring equity and unity. We lift up in prayer those in need in Afghanistan, whose people are desperately trying to get out, and in Haiti, devastated by earthquake and flooding. Provide for those whose homes and towns have been destroyed by wildfire here in California and elsewhere in the U.S. and abroad. We ask for your healing presence with those suffering from COVID, as well as those with chronic conditions and illness. We lift up our prayer partners this week, Augusta Duncan and Dixon Adetuyi and Adeyinka, Bill Feaster and Judith Ross, Bob Fleming, and Ed Fronheim, Rowena Ritchie, Skyla, and Julius. We ask these things in the name of your Son, Jesus, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Family of faith, as you leave this place, may God grant you the curiosity to counter assumptions, the vulnerability to befriend, the bravery to speak your truth, the wisdom to listen, the strength to ask for help, and the resiliency to choose love, even when it's hard, and the awareness of the Holy Spirit always beside you. In the name of the great connector, love itself. Go in peace. Amen.